Hello and welcome to Tales from 2.21b, where every story feels like a conversation over a warm cup of coffee. Settle in, dear listener, as I, Dr. John H. Watson, recount a most perplexing case from the annals of Sherlock Holmes. A tale of treachery, deceit, and the sinister shadows that lurk within the walls of Ashcroft Manor. Chapter 1. A Visitor in the Fog. It was a chill November evening in 1887, and London lay smothered beneath a fog so dense it seemed the city had been plunged into a spectral sea. The gas lamps along Baker Street flickered like weary sentinels, their feeble light barely piercing the swirling mist that clung to the cobblestones. Within the comforting walls of 221b, a fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across the room. Sherlock Holmes, my singular friend and companion, reclined in his armchair, his long fingers coaxing a mournful tune from his violin. The notes wove a melancholy spell, as though echoing the gloom that enveloped the city beyond our windows. I sat at my desk, my pen scratching across the pages of my journal, recording the details of our most recent adventure, a trifling matter of a stolen cameo, resolved with Holmes's characteristic brilliance. The hour was late, and the world outside seemed hushed, save for the occasional clatter of a hansom cab or the distant cry of a street vendor muffled by the fog. I had just begun to entertain thoughts of retiring for the night when a sharp rap at the door shattered the quiet. Holmes paused, his bow hovering above the strings, his keen eyes glinting with sudden interest. "A visitor, Watson," he said, his voice low and alert. "At this hour and in such weather, it can only be a matter of some urgency." Mrs. Hudson, our ever-patient landlady, appeared at the threshold, her expression a mixture of concern and exasperation. "A lady to see you, Mr. Holmes," she said, her tone suggesting she disapproved of such late callers. "She seems in quite a state, poor thing. Shall I show her up?" "By all means, Mrs. Hudson," Holmes replied, setting his violin aside with a deliberate grace. "And pray bring a pot of tea. Our guest may require fortification." I rose from my desk, curious and somewhat apprehensive. Late-night visitors to 221b were seldom bearers of trivial news. As Mrs. Hudson retreated, the sound of hesitant footsteps ascended the stairs, accompanied by the rustle of heavy skirts. A moment later, a woman appeared in the doorway, her figure cloaked in a dark mantle, her face pale as moonlight beneath the hood. She was of middle age, her features refined yet drawn, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and determination. In her gloved hand, she clutched a crumpled letter, its edges worn as though it had been read and reread in distress. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes?" she asked, her voice trembling yet resolute. "And Dr. Watson, I presume?" "You have the advantage of us, madam," Holmes said, rising and gesturing to an armchair by the fire. "Pray be seated and tell us how we may be of service." The lady hesitated, then lowered herself into the chair, her movements betraying a nervous energy. "I am Lady Eleanor Ashcroft of Ashcroft Manor," she said, her words measured but tinged with desperation. "I come to you, Mr. Holmes, because I am told you are the only man in London capable of unraveling the darkness that has descended upon my home. I fear for my safety, nay, for my very life." Holmes leaned forward, his eyes narrowing with that predatory intensity that signaled his mind was fully engaged. "Darkness, you say? A most intriguing word. Pray, Lady Eleanor, begin at the beginning and omit no detail, however trivial it may seem. Watson, do take notes." I hastened to retrieve my notebook, my curiosity now thoroughly piqued. Lady Eleanor drew a shuddering breath, her fingers tightening around the letter in her hand. "It began 6 months ago," she said, "with the death of my husband, Lord Henry Ashcroft. He was found dead in his study at the manor, the door locked from within, the windows barred. The coroner declared it heart failure, for Henry had been under great strain in his final months, managing the estate and its many debts. Yet I could not shake the feeling that something was amiss. He was not an old man nor frail, and his health had seemed robust until those final weeks. Holmes's fingers steepled beneath his chin, a sign of deep contemplation. A locked room, you say? Most curious. Continue, madam. Lady Eleanor's gaze dropped to the letter, her voice growing softer. Since his death, the manor has been plagued by strange occurrences. Valuables have gone missing. Jewelry, silver, even a portrait of my husband's mother. At night I hear footsteps in the corridors, though the servants swear they are abed. And then, this morning, I received this. She extended the letter to Holmes, her hand trembling. Holmes took the paper, unfolding it with care. I leaned closer, catching a glimpse of bold, angular handwriting. The message was brief but chilling. Leave Ashcroft Manor, or join your husband in eternal rest. The paper bore no signature, only a faint smudge of ink at the bottom, as though the writer had pressed too hard in haste. A threat, and a bold one, Holmes murmured, holding the letter to the light. The paper is of common stock, the ink standard, but the hand suggests education and resolve. Tell me, Lady Eleanor, who resides at the manor besides yourself? My household is small, she replied. There is Mrs. Grimsby, the housekeeper, who has served us for decades, Eliza, a young maid, and Reginald Thorne, our butler. There are also a few groundskeepers, but they live in the village and do not stay overnight. Of them all, it is Thorne who troubles me most. He has been with us for 20 years, yet since Henry's death his demeanor has grown cold, his eyes watchful. I suspect he knows more than he lets on. Holmes's lips curved into a faint smile. A butler with secrets, a classic figure in such dramas. And what of your husband's affairs? Debts, you mentioned. Were there enemies, perhaps creditors, who might harbor ill will? Lady Eleanor hesitated, her cheeks flushing slightly. Henry was a proud man, and not all his ventures were successful. There were debts, yes, and he had dealings with a moneylender in London, a man named Silas Grieve. I know little of the particulars, for Henry shielded me from such matters. But I believe he was attempting to settle these debts before his death. Silas Grieve, Holmes repeated, his tone thoughtful. A name worth noting. Watson, remind me to consult my files on London's less savory financiers. Now, Lady Eleanor, describe the manor itself, its layout, its peculiarities. As she spoke, I scribbled furiously, capturing her description of Ashcroft Manor. A sprawling Gothic pile in the Kent countryside, its stone walls draped in ivy, its corridors labyrinthine. The study where Lord Ashcroft died was in the west wing, a room he favored for its solitude. It was sealed after his death, its key supposedly lost. Lady Eleanor's voice faltered as she spoke of the manor's oppressive atmosphere, as though the very walls whispered of secrets. Holmes listened in silence, his eyes half closed, yet I knew his mind was racing, cataloging every word, every inflection. When she finished, he rose abruptly, pacing before the fire. A locked room, missing heirlooms, a threatening letter, and a butler of questionable loyalty, he said almost to himself. The threads of a most intricate tapestry. Lady Eleanor, I will take your case. Watson, pack your bag. We depart for Ashcroft Manor at dawn. The fog may obscure the path, but it shall not deter us. Lady Eleanor's shoulders sagged with relief, though her eyes remained haunted. Thank you, Mr. Holmes. I pray you can lift this shadow from my home. As Mrs. Hudson arrived with tea, Holmes dismissed our guest with instructions to prepare for our arrival. The door closed behind her, and the room fell silent once more, save for the crackle of the fire. I turned to Holmes, my mind awhirl with questions. What do you make of it, Holmes? A locked room death, A cryptic threat. Do you suspect murder? Holmes resumed his seat, his expression enigmatic. Suspicion, Watson, is the enemy of clarity. We have facts, and facts alone will guide us. The locked room intrigues me, as does this butler Thorne. But it is the letter that holds the key, or perhaps the misdirection. We shall see. He picked up his violin, drawing the bow across the strings with a flourish. Rest now, Watson. Tomorrow we venture into the fog. I retired to my room, my thoughts consumed by the mystery. The image of Lady Eleanor, pale and trembling, lingered in my mind, as did the ominous words of the letter. What secrets lay hidden in Ashcroft Manor? And what role did the sinister butler play in this unfolding drama? As I drifted to sleep, the fog seemed to seep into my dreams, a harbinger of the challenges that awaited us. Chapter 2. The Shadow of Ashcroft Manor. The journey to Ashcroft Manor was as bleak as the November morning that greeted us at dawn. The fog, which had smothered London the previous night, seemed to have pursued us into the Kent countryside, clinging to the windows of our train like a living entity. I sat opposite Sherlock Holmes, my notebook open on my lap, though the rhythmic clatter of the wheels and the oppressive mist outside dulled my inclination to write. Holmes, however, was alert, his sharp eyes scanning the passing landscape, or what little of it could be seen through the haze. His silence was not one of idleness. I knew his mind was already dissecting Lady Eleanor Ashcroft's tale, weaving the sparse facts into a tapestry of possibilities. "Watson," he said at length, his voice cutting through the hum of the train, "what do you make of this manor we are to visit?" "A Gothic edifice," Lady Eleanor said, "with a locked study and a history of debts. Does it not stir the imagination?" I glanced up from my notebook, where I had been jotting notes on our client's story. "It sounds a grim place, Holmes. A locked room death, missing heirlooms, and that threatening letter. It's as though the manor itself is complicit in some dark scheme." Holmes's lips twitched in a faint smile. "A poetic notion, Watson, but we must guard against fancy. Buildings do not conspire, though their inhabitants may. I am particularly curious about this butler, Reginald Thorne. 20 years of service, yet his demeanor shifts after Lord Ashcroft's death. Loyalty, or the pretense of it, is often a mask for deeper motives." The train shuddered to a halt at a small windswept station, and we disembarked into a world of mist and shadow. A hansom cab awaited, its driver bundled against the cold, his horse snorting clouds of vapor. The ride to Ashcroft Manor was silent, save for the creak of the cab and the muffled clop of hooves on the muddy lane. As we approached, the manor emerged from the fog like a specter, its stone walls draped in ivy, its turrets piercing the low clouds. The windows, dark and numerous, seemed to watch our arrival with an almost sentient intensity. I felt a chill that had little to do with the weather. "An imposing structure," I remarked as the cab drew to a stop before the manor's iron gates. "It looks as though it could harbor 100 secrets." "And so it may," Holmes replied, stepping down and surveying the grounds with his piercing gaze. "Note the gravel path, Watson. Those scuff marks near the gate suggest recent activity, perhaps hurried. And there, by the yew tree, a stain. Mud, or something less innocent. We shall see." The gates creaked open, revealing a drive lined with ancient oaks, their branches gnarled and bare. At the manor's entrance, we were met by Mrs. Grimsby, the housekeeper, a stout woman with a lined face and nervous hands. Her curtsy was stiff, her eyes darting toward a tall, lean figure who emerged from the shadows of the portico. This, I presumed, was Reginald Thorne, the butler. His appearance was striking, gaunt, with a sallow complexion and eyes that seemed to weigh us as we approached. His smile was thin, almost serpentine, and I felt an instinctive unease. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson." Mrs. Grimsby said, her voice tight. "Lady Eleanor is expecting you. Please, come inside." Thorne inclined his head, his manner impeccable yet cold. "I shall see to your bags, gentlemen," he said, his voice smooth as polished stone. As he turned, Holmes's eyes followed him, noting every detail, the slight stiffness in his gait, the way his fingers lingered on the door handle. The manor's interior was as oppressive as its exterior promised. The grand hall was vast, its high ceiling lost in shadow, its walls adorned with dusty portraits of Ashcroft's past. Gas lamps flickered, casting long shadows that danced across the polished floor. A massive oak staircase spiraled upward, flanked by suits of armor that stood like silent sentinels. The air was heavy with the scent of old wood and wax, tinged with something less definable. Decay, perhaps, or the weight of secrets. Lady Eleanor awaited us in a drawing room off the hall, its windows draped in heavy velvet that muted the gray light. She rose as we entered, her face pale but composed. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, I cannot thank you enough for coming. The manor feels heavier since last night. I heard footsteps again near the west wing." Holmes nodded, his expression unreadable. "We shall begin at once, Lady Eleanor. First, I would see the grounds, then the study where your husband met his end. Mrs. Grimsby, you will accompany us. Thorne, I presume, has duties to attend." The butler, who had entered with a tray of tea, paused almost imperceptibly. "Indeed, sir," he said, setting the tray down with deliberate care. "I shall be in the servants' quarters if you require me." His departure was silent, yet I felt his presence linger like a shadow that refused to fade. Holmes's inspection of the grounds was meticulous. He crouched by the gravel path, examining the scuff marks with a magnifying glass. "Recent, Watson," he murmured, "and made by boots too fine for a groundskeeper. Someone left in haste, perhaps under cover of fog." The stain by the yew tree proved to be mud, but Holmes pocketed a sample, muttering about chemical analysis. He paced the perimeter of the manor, noting the placement of windows, the accessibility of side entrances, and the state of the ivy, which bore signs of disturbance near a ground-floor window. "Someone has climbed here," he said, pointing to broken tendrils. "Not recently, but within the past month. Curious." Inside, we proceeded to the west wing, where the locked study awaited. The corridor leading to it was narrow, its walls lined with faded tapestries depicting hunting scenes. The air grew colder as we approached, and I fancied I heard a faint creak, though it might have been the settling of the old house. Mrs. Grimsby fumbled with a ring of keys, her hands trembling. "The study has been sealed since his lordship's death," she said. "No one enters by Lady Eleanor's orders." Holmes examined the door, a heavy oak affair with a sturdy lock. "No signs of tampering," he noted, running his fingers along the frame. "The key, Mrs. Grimsby. Where is it kept?" "It was lost, sir," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Lord Ashcroft had the only one, and it was not found after he passed." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "A locked room with a missing key. Most promising. We shall return to this, but first I wish to speak with the staff. Every manor has its whispers, Watson, and servants hear them all." We returned to the drawing room where Lady Eleanor sat, her hands clasped tightly. Holmes questioned her further, his tone gentle but probing. "Tell me of Thorne's habits," he said. "Does he leave the manor often? Does he receive visitors?" Lady Eleanor frowned. "He rarely leaves except for errands in the village. As for visitors, none that I know of. But he has grown secretive, Mr. Holmes. I once saw him reading a letter in the hall, and when he noticed me, he hid it quickly." Holmes nodded, filing the information away. "And the maid, Eliza, how long has she been in your service?" "Only a year," Lady Eleanor replied. "She is young but diligent. I have no complaints, though she seems frightened of late." As we spoke, the manor seemed to close in around us, its silence oppressive. I glanced at the windows, half expecting to see a face peering through the fog. Holmes, however, was undeterred, his mind a whirl of calculations. "Watson," he said as we prepared to interview the staff, "this manor is a puzzle box, and every creak, every shadow is a piece. The scuff marks, the ivy, the missing key. They speak, if one knows how to listen." Mrs. Grimsby led us to the servants' quarters, a dim warren of rooms beneath the main house. The air was damp, the walls stained with age. Eliza, the maid, was there, polishing silver with a nervous energy. She started at our approach, her eyes wide. "Begging your pardon, sirs," she said. "I didn't hear you come." Holmes's smile was disarming, but his eyes missed nothing. "No matter, Eliza. Tell me, have you noticed anything unusual of late? Strange visitors, perhaps, or odd behavior from Mr. Thorne?" Eliza hesitated, her fingers twisting the cloth. I don't know, sir. The manor's always been quiet, but since his lordship died, it feels wrong. I've heard things, footsteps, like her ladyship said. And Mr. Thorne, he's been out late some nights, though. He says it's for supplies." Holmes nodded, his expression unreadable. "Thank you, Eliza. You've been most helpful." As we left the servants' quarters, Holmes paused in the hall, his gaze distant. "The butler's nocturnal excursions, Watson, and a maid who hears too much. The pieces begin to align, but the picture remains obscured. Tonight we shall keep watch. The fog may hide much, but it cannot hide from Sherlock Holmes." Chapter 3. The Butler's Secret. The atmosphere of Ashcroft Manor seemed to grow heavier with each passing hour, as though the very stones of the old house conspired to guard its secrets. Sherlock Holmes and I had spent the morning exploring the grounds and questioning Lady Eleanor, but it was in the grand hall, as afternoon waned, that our investigation took a darker turn. The hall was a cavernous space, its walls adorned with portraits of stern-faced Ashcrofts, their eyes seeming to follow us as we moved. Gas lamps had been lit, their flames casting a warm but insufficient glow against the encroaching gloom. A storm was brewing outside, the distant rumble of thunder adding a portentous note to the scene. Holmes stood by the massive fireplace, his silhouette sharp against the flickering flames. He had been unusually silent since our return from the servants' quarters, his mind no doubt racing through the clues we had gathered. The scuff marks on the gravel path, the disturbed ivy, and Eliza's hesitant mention of Thorne's late-night excursions. I sat near Lady Eleanor, who sipped her tea with trembling hands, her eyes darting toward the doorway where Reginald Thorne had just entered, bearing a silver tray with a fresh pot and delicate porcelain cups. "Tea, gentlemen?" Thorne asked, his voice smooth as ever, though I detected a faint edge beneath his polished demeanor. His tall, gaunt frame moved with a grace that seemed almost rehearsed, and his eyes, dark and unreadable, lingered on Holmes for a fraction too long. "Thank you, Thorne," Holmes replied, his tone amiable but laced with a probing intent. He accepted a cup, his fingers brushing the saucer as he studied the butler's hands. "You have served the Ashcrofts for 20 years, I understand. A remarkable tenure. Few remain so devoted in these changing times." Thorne inclined his head, his smile thin. "It is my duty, sir, and my privilege. The Ashcrofts have been good to me." "Indeed," Holmes said, his eyes narrowing slightly. "And yet Lady Eleanor tells me your manner has changed since Lord Ashcroft's death. More reserved, perhaps, or burdened by some private concern." The butler's hand paused almost imperceptibly as he poured tea for me. "Grief affects us all differently, Mr. Holmes," he said, his voice steady but cold. "His lordship's passing was a blow to the household. I merely strive to maintain order in its wake." Holmes sipped his tea, his gaze never leaving Thorne. "Order is a noble pursuit. Tell me, Do you often venture out at night for supplies, as the maid Eliza mentioned? The village is some distance, and the fog makes travel treacherous. Thorne's expression did not falter, but I noticed a slight tightening of his jaw. Occasionally, sir, when the manor's needs demand it. I am accustomed to the roads, fog or no. Holmes set down his cup with a deliberate clink. Most commendable. Watson, shall we continue our inquiries? I believe Mr. Thorne has duties to attend, but we may have further questions later. The butler bowed and retreated, his footsteps silent on the polished floor. As soon as he was out of earshot, Holmes leaned toward me, his voice low. Observe, Watson, the tremor in his hand when I mentioned his nocturnal outings. Our butler is not as composed as he would have us believe. I propose we inspect his quarters while he is occupied. Lady Eleanor, who had been listening in silence, looked alarmed. Mr. Holmes, is that proper? Thorne has been loyal despite his recent demeanor. I would not wish to accuse him unjustly. Rest assured, madam, Holmes replied. I seek only the truth, not accusation. If Thorne is innocent, our search will confirm it. If not, we may uncover a key to this puzzle. With Lady Eleanor's reluctant consent, we made our way to the servants' quarters, a dim and narrow corridor beneath the main house. Thorne's room was austere, its furnishings limited to a narrow bed, a wardrobe, and a small desk. The air was musty, tinged with the scent of polish and old wood. Holmes moved with the precision of a bloodhound, his eyes scanning every surface. He tapped the walls, tested the floorboards, and examined the desk, where a few papers lay neatly stacked, bills and household inventories, nothing out of the ordinary. Curious, Holmes murmured, kneeling by the bed. He ran his fingers along the baseboard, pausing at a faint seam. With a gentle press, a small panel sprang open, revealing a hidden compartment no larger than a cigar box. Inside lay a glass vial filled with a colorless liquid, stoppered with a cork and a folded piece of paper. Holmes held the vial to the light, his expression one of intense concentration. Poison, perhaps, I ventured, my medical instincts stirring. It could be arsenic or strychnine. Colorless, odorless, and deadly in small doses. Possibly, Watson, Holmes replied, slipping the vial into his pocket. But speculation without analysis is folly. I shall test this in London, where I have the necessary equipment. The paper, however, may speak more immediately. He unfolded it carefully, revealing a brief note in a cramped, hurried hand. Payment due by month's end, or the truth comes out. R.T. R.T., I said, my pulse quickening. Reginald Thorne's initials. This is damning, Holmes. Perhaps, Holmes said, his tone cautious. But initials are not proof, and this note is too convenient. A true conspirator would not leave such evidence so easily found. We must tread carefully, Watson, lest we fall into a trap of misdirection. We replaced the panel and left the room as we found it, returning to the grand hall. Thorne was nowhere to be seen, but Mrs. Grimsby awaited us, her hands twisting nervously. Did you find anything, Mr. Holmes? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Nothing conclusive, Holmes replied smoothly. But I would speak with you, Mrs. Grimsby. You have served here longer than most. What can you tell me of Thorne's character before Lord Ashcroft's death? The housekeeper hesitated, glancing toward the doorway as though expecting Thorne to appear. He was always diligent, sir, if a bit distant. But after his lordship died, he changed. Kept to himself, spent hours in the west wing near the study. I thought it was grief, but now I'm not so sure. Holmes nodded, his eyes gleaming. And did Lord Ashcroft ever mention debts or disputes with anyone? Perhaps a moneylender named Silas Grieve? Mrs. Grimsby's face paled. I heard the name once, sir, in an argument between his lordship and Thorne. It was months before the death, and they stopped talking when I entered. I thought nothing of it at the time. Most illuminating, Holmes said. Thank you, Mrs. Grimsby. Watson, let us return to the West Wing. The study beckons, and I suspect it holds more than memories of Lord Ashcroft. As we made our way through the manor's labyrinthine corridors, the storm outside grew fiercer, rain lashing the windows and thunder rattling the panes. The West Wing was colder still, the air heavy with the scent of dust and disuse. The locked study door loomed ahead, its oak surface unyielding. Holmes examined it again, his fingers tracing the lock and frame with meticulous care. No scratches, no signs of forced entry, he said. The key's absence is troubling but not insurmountable. Watson, your medical expertise may be needed. If Lord Ashcroft was poisoned, as the vial suggests, there may be traces in the study. Residue on a glass, perhaps, or papers stained with the substance. I nodded, though the thought of poison sent a chill through me. I'll look for anything unusual, Holmes. But if the door is locked and the key lost, how do we enter? Holmes's smile was enigmatic. Patience, Watson. Every lock has its secret, and this one will yield in time. For now, let us focus on Thorne. His behavior, the vial, the note, all point to involvement, yet I sense a larger game at play. We must watch him closely tonight. As we returned to the drawing room where Lady Eleanor awaited, I felt the weight of the manor pressing down on us. Thorne's secret compartment, the mysterious note, and the locked study formed a puzzle that seemed to grow more complex with each discovery. Holmes, however, was undeterred, his mind a beacon in the fog of uncertainty. Watson, he said as we sat by the fire, this case is like a chessboard with pieces moving in shadow. Thorne is a knight, perhaps, but not the king. We must uncover the true player before the game turns deadly. I glanced at Lady Eleanor, her face pale in the firelight, and wondered what further secrets Ashcroft Manor held. The butler's secret was but one thread in the tapestry, and I feared the pattern was far darker than we yet understood. Chapter 4. Whispers in the servants' quarters. The shadows of Ashcroft Manor seemed to deepen as evening fell, the storm outside battering the ancient walls with relentless fury. Rain lashed the windows, and the wind howled through the chimneys, lending the house an air of restless disquiet. Sherlock Holmes and I had retreated from the grand hall after our unsettling discovery in Reginald Thorne's quarters. A vial of colorless liquid and a cryptic note bearing the initials R.T. The implications were grave, yet Holmes remained cautious, warning against hasty conclusions. The evidence is suggestive, Watson, he had said, but it is too neatly placed, like a lure in a trap. We must seek the truth in less obvious corners. Our next destination was the servants' quarters, a labyrinth of low-ceilinged rooms tucked beneath the manor's opulent upper floors. The air here was damp and heavy, scented with coal dust and the faint tang of lye soap. Oil lamps hung from iron brackets, their light casting wavering shadows that seemed to dance with secrets of their own. As we descended the narrow stone staircase, I felt the weight of the manor pressing down, its history of grief and mystery palpable in the chill air. Mrs. Grimsby led us to a small common room where the household staff gathered when not attending their duties. The space was sparsely furnished. A scarred wooden table, a few rickety chairs, and a hearth where a meager fire sputtered. Eliza, the young maid we had met earlier, was there, polishing a pile of silver cutlery with a nervous energy. Another servant, a scullery maid named Mary, sat mending a torn apron, her eyes darting to us as we entered. A third figure, an older footman named Thomas, lounged in a corner, whittling a piece of wood with a small knife. The atmosphere was tense, as though our presence had interrupted some unspoken conversation. "Good evening," Holmes said, his tone genial but laced with authority. "I trust we are not intruding. My friend Dr. Watson and I have a few questions, if you would indulge us." Eliza's hands faltered, the cloth slipping from her fingers. "Of course, sir," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We'll help however we can." Holmes settled into a chair, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp, taking in every detail. The maid's nervous glances, the footman's sudden stillness. "Excellent. Let us begin with you, Eliza. You mentioned earlier that you've heard footsteps in the night. Can you be more specific? Where precisely, and at what hours?" Eliza swallowed, her eyes flickering toward Mrs. Grimsby, who stood near the door like a sentinel. "It's mostly in the west wing, sir, near the study. Late, after midnight. I thought it was the wind at first, but it's too regular, like someone pacing slow and careful." Holmes nodded, his fingers steepled. "And have you seen anyone during these nocturnal wanderings? Mr. Thorne, perhaps, or another?" The maid hesitated, her cheeks flushing. I don't like to speak ill, sir. But once, about a week ago, I saw Mr. Thorne coming from the west wing well past midnight. He said he was checking the locks, but he looked strange, like he was angry or scared. He was muttering to himself something about a debt long owed. I didn't catch it all. "A debt long owed," Holmes repeated, his voice low. "Most intriguing. And you, Mary, have you heard or seen anything unusual?" The scullery maid glanced up from her sewing, her needle pausing mid-stitch. "Not footsteps, sir, but I've seen someone outside the manor near the gates. A cloaked figure, tall, moving quick-like in the fog. I thought it was a poacher, but they didn't come near the house. It was 2 nights ago, just before dawn." Holmes's eyes gleamed with interest. "A cloaked figure, you say? Did you see their face, or any distinguishing feature?" Mary shook her head. "No, sir. The fog was too thick, and I only saw them from the kitchen window. They were gone quick, like they knew they were being watched." I scribbled notes furiously, my mind racing. A cloaked figure near the gates, Thorne's late-night wanderings, and the mysterious note in his room. Each piece seemed to deepen the puzzle. Holmes turned to the footman, Thomas, who had remained silent, his knife carving slow, deliberate curls from the wood. "And you, Thomas? Surely a man of your experience has noticed something amiss in this house." Thomas shrugged, his weathered face impassive. "I keep to my duties, sir. Don't much care for gossip. But if you're asking about Mr. Thorne, he's been odd since his lordship died. Keeps to himself, spends time in the library when he thinks no one's looking. I've seen him with papers, letters maybe. But I don't pry." Holmes leaned forward, his voice softening but carrying a steely edge. "Letters, you say? Can you describe them? Size, color, anything at all?" Thomas scratched his chin, his eyes narrowing. "Small, folded tight, like he didn't want them seen. One had a red seal, but I couldn't make out the design. He stuffed it in his pocket when he saw me." Holmes's smile was faint but triumphant. "Thank you, Thomas. You've been most helpful." He rose, gesturing for me to follow. "Mrs. Grimsby, we shall return to the main house. I wish to see the west wing again, particularly the area near the study. There is a thread here, Watson, and I mean to pull it." As we ascended to the main floor, the manor's oppressive silence seemed to close in around us. The servants' accounts had painted a picture of unease, with Thorne at its center. Yet Holmes's caution about misdirection lingered in my mind. The cloaked figure was a new element, one that suggested an external threat, or perhaps a collaborator within the manor's walls. We paused in the west wing corridor where the locked study door stood like a silent challenge. Holmes examined the floor, his magnifying glass glinting in the dim light of a nearby lamp. "See here, Watson," he said, pointing to faint scratches in the dust. "These are recent, made by boots with a distinctive heel pattern. Not Thorne's, I wager. His boots are polished to a mirror shine, and these marks suggest wear. Someone else has been here, perhaps the cloaked figure Mary saw. I frowned, my medical instincts stirring. Could it be connected to the vial we found? If Thorne is poisoning someone or being blackmailed, this figure might be his accomplice or his tormentor. Holmes straightened, his expression thoughtful. A possibility, but we lack evidence to confirm it. The vial awaits analysis, and the notes RT may not refer to Thorne at all. We must consider the sealed chamber Lady Eleanor mentioned. The study's twin, untouched since Lord Ashcroft's death. If it holds secrets, it may hold answers. We sought out Lady Eleanor in the drawing room, where she sat by a fire that did little to warm the chill air. Her face was drawn, her eyes shadowed with worry. "Have you found anything, Mr. Holmes?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Clues, madam, but not yet conclusions," Holmes replied. "Tell me of this sealed chamber in the West Wing. Why has it remained untouched, and who has access?" Lady Eleanor's hands tightened in her lap. "It was my husband's private study, a smaller room adjacent to the main one. He used it for sensitive matters, business papers, personal correspondence. After his death, I ordered it sealed, unable to bear the sight of his things. The key is with Mrs. Grimsby, though she swears no one has entered since." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "And yet footsteps echo in the West Wing. Mrs. Grimsby, fetch the key. We shall see what this chamber conceals." Mrs. Grimsby returned moments later, her hands trembling as she handed Holmes a heavy iron key. We proceeded to the West Wing, where a second door, smaller and less ornate than the main study, stood at the corridor's end. The lock was stiff, but it yielded with a groan, revealing a cramped room lined with bookshelves and a single desk. Dust coated every surface, undisturbed save for a faint trail leading to a bookshelf in the corner. Holmes pounced on the trail, his fingers tracing the shelf's edge. "A hidden catch, Watson," he said, pressing a panel that clicked softly. The shelf swung inward, revealing a narrow alcove containing a single item, a leather-bound ledger, its pages yellowed but intact. "Lord Ashcroft's, I presume," Holmes said, flipping through the pages. The ledger detailed payments to an unknown party, each entry marked with the initials RT and dated over the past year. "A pattern emerges, Watson. These payments ceased a month before Lord Ashcroft's death. A debt unpaid, perhaps, or a betrayal." I stared at the ledger, my mind racing. Thorne again? Or someone else with those initials? Holmes closed the book, tucking it under his arm. "That, Watson, is the question. The servants' whispers have given us much to ponder, but we must tread carefully. The cloaked figure, the ledger, Thorne's mutterings, they form a web, and we are not yet at its center." As we left the chamber, the manor's shadows seemed to lengthen, the storm's fury a fitting backdrop to the mystery unfolding within. Thorne remained a specter at the heart of our inquiries, but the cloaked figure in the ledger suggested a deeper conspiracy, one that Holmes was determined to unravel. Chapter 5. The Locked Room Riddle. The storm that had battered Ashcroft Manor throughout the day had grown fiercer by late afternoon, its relentless assault shaking the ancient windows and filling the corridors with an eerie chorus of moans. Sherlock Holmes and I stood before the locked study in the West Wing, the room where Lord Henry Ashcroft had met his untimely end 6 months prior. The discovery of the ledger in the sealed chamber, with its cryptic entries marked RT, had deepened the mystery, and Holmes was now determined to breach the study itself, convinced it held the key to unraveling the sinister web enveloping the manor. The heavy oak door stood as a silent sentinel, its surface unmarred by scratches or signs of forced entry. The lock, a sturdy iron mechanism, gleamed dully in the flickering light of an oil lamp held by Mrs. Grimsby, who hovered anxiously behind us. Lady Eleanor had joined us, her face pale but resolute, her hands clasped tightly as though to steady her nerves. The air in the corridor was cold, heavy with the scent of dust and old secrets, and I felt a prickle of unease as Holmes knelt to examine the lock with his magnifying glass. "No visible tampering," he murmured, his voice low but vibrant with focus. "The key, as you say, is lost, yet the mechanism is intact. Curious, Watson, that a room so central to this tragedy should be so inaccessible. Every lock has its secret, and I intend to find this one's." I glanced at Lady Eleanor, whose eyes were fixed on the door. "Was there no spare key, madam?" I asked. "Surely Lord Ashcroft kept one somewhere." She shook her head, her voice barely above a whisper. "He was particular about that room, Dr. Watson. He said it was his sanctuary where he could think without interruption. The key was always on his person, and after his death it was never found." Holmes rose, his expression thoughtful. A missing key, a sealed chamber, and a death deemed natural yet shrouded in suspicion. The pieces are aligning, Watson, but the picture remains obscured. Mrs. Grimsby, you have been with the family for decades. Did Lord Ashcroft ever mention a hidden mechanism or passage in this room? The housekeeper's hands trembled, the lamp casting wavering shadows on the tapestried walls. "Not directly, sir, but he was fond of old houses and their quirks. He once said Ashcroft Manor had secrets in its bones, though I took it for a jest. I never saw him open this door with anything but the key." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Secrets in its bones, a fitting metaphor. Let us see if the manor will yield this one." He turned his attention to the doorframe, running his fingers along the edges, tapping lightly as though listening for a response. His movements were precise, almost surgical, and I watched in fascination as he paused at the base of the fireplace, which stood adjacent to the door. "Observe, Watson," he said, crouching again. "The hearthstone here is slightly misaligned, a fraction too high on one side. An oversight in construction or something more?" He pressed firmly on the stone, and with a faint click, a section of the paneled wall beside the fireplace slid inward, revealing a narrow passage barely wide enough for a man to pass through. Lady Eleanor gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Good heavens, Mr. Holmes, how did you know?" Holmes's smile was faint but triumphant. "Observation, madam." The dust on the floor showed faint disturbances, and the fireplace is a classic location for such mechanisms in houses of this age. "Come, Watson, let us explore this hidden path." I followed Holmes into the passage, my heart pounding as the lamplight illuminated rough stone walls and a low ceiling. The air was stale, tinged with the musty scent of disuse. The passage curved slightly, ending at a small alcove that opened into the study itself. We emerged into a room frozen in time, a mahogany desk strewn with papers, a high-backed chair pushed askew, and barred windows that admitted only the faintest glow from the stormy sky outside. The fireplace within the study was cold, its hearth littered with ashes, and a faint chemical odor lingered, barely perceptible but enough to stir my medical instincts. "Poison?" I ventured, my voice echoing in the confined space. If Lord Ashcroft was poisoned, as the vial in Thorne's room suggests, there might be traces here. A glass, perhaps, or residue on these papers. Holmes nodded, his eyes scanning the room with predatory intensity. "A sound hypothesis, Watson. Let us search methodically." He moved to the desk where letters, ledgers, and a crystal decanter sat amidst the clutter. He examined the decanter first, sniffing cautiously at its contents. Brandy and untainted as far as I can discern. But this... He lifted a glass tumbler, its interior faintly clouded. "A residue, Watson. Perhaps your medical expertise can identify it." I took the glass, holding it to the light. A thin, powdery film coated the inside, colorless but unmistakable to a trained eye. "It could be arsenic," I said, my voice grim, "or another alkaloid poison. I'd need a laboratory to confirm, but it's consistent with slow-acting toxins that mimic natural causes like heart failure. Holmes's expression darkened. Precisely what a clever murderer would use. But we must not leap to conclusions. The vial in Thorne's room awaits analysis, and this glass may be a decoy. Let us examine the papers. The desk yielded a treasure trove of documents. Estate records, letters from creditors, and a personal journal penned in Lord Ashcroft's precise hand. Holmes pored over the journal, his fingers tracing the lines with care. "Listen to this, Watson," he said, reading aloud. "The burden grows heavier. SG demands payment, but I cannot comply without ruin. RT knows too much, and I fear his loyalty wavers." SG. Silas Grieve, the moneylender, no doubt. And RT, Reginald Thorne or another? I frowned, the initials echoing the note from Thorne's quarters. "It seems to point to Thorne, Holmes. The ledger we found had the same initials, and now this journal. Could he have been blackmailing Lord Ashcroft?" Holmes closed the journal, his gaze distant. "Possible, but the evidence is too convenient. A true blackmailer would not leave such a trail. This journal, like the note, feels staged, as though meant to be found. We must consider the possibility of a red herring, Watson." He moved to the bookshelf, where a few volumes lay askew. His fingers brushed the spine of a worn copy of Moby Dick, and with a gentle tug, another hidden panel clicked open, revealing a small compartment. Inside was a single item, a folded letter, its wax seal broken but bearing the faint imprint of a crest. Holmes unfolded it carefully, his eyes narrowing as he read. "A contract," he said, "between Lord Ashcroft and an unnamed party, promising a substantial sum in exchange for silence on matters of family honor. The initials again, RT, but the crest is unfamiliar, not Ashcroft's. This deepens the puzzle." I peered over his shoulder, my mind racing. A family secret, then. Perhaps Thorne was protecting or exploiting something Lord Ashcroft wished to keep hidden. Holmes pocketed the letter, his expression unreadable. Or someone wishes us to believe so. The locked room, the hidden passage, the incriminating documents, all point too neatly to Thorne. I suspect a larger game, Watson, one where the butler is but a pawn. We searched the room further, finding little else of note. The chemical odor persisted, strongest near the fireplace, where Holmes discovered a faint stain on the hearthstone. "Possibly from the poison," he said, scraping a sample into a small envelope. "We shall test this alongside the vial. Every clue is a thread, and we are weaving a net to catch the truth." As we emerged from the passage, Lady Eleanor and Mrs. Grimsby awaited us, their faces anxious. "What did you find, Mr. Holmes?" Lady Eleanor asked, her voice trembling. "Clues, madam, but not yet answers," Holmes replied. "The study confirms your husband's death was no accident, but the perpetrator remains elusive. We must speak with Thorne again, and soon. His role in this drama is pivotal, whether as villain or victim." The storm outside roared, a fitting echo of the turmoil within the manor. The locked room had yielded its secrets, a hidden passage, a tainted glass, a cryptic contract, but each revelation only deepened the mystery. Thorne's shadow loomed large, yet Holmes's caution about misdirection gnawed at me. Was the butler the architect of this tragedy, or merely a piece in a larger scheme? As we left the West Wing, the manor's oppressive silence seemed to mock us, its secrets still safely locked away. Chapter 6. A Trail Through London. The discoveries in Ashcroft Manor's locked study had cast a long shadow over our investigation. Each clue, the hidden passage, the tainted glass, the cryptic contract marked RT, adding weight to the mystery. Sherlock Holmes, however, was undeterred, his mind a crucible where facts were forged into insight. By late evening, as the storm's fury began to wane, he declared our next move, A return to London to pursue a lead from the ledger found in the sealed chamber. The entries had pointed to a moneylender named Silas Grieve, a name mentioned in Lord Ashcroft's journal, and confirmed by Mrs. Grimsby's recollection of a heated argument. "The manor holds its secrets tightly, Watson," Holmes said as we prepared to depart, "but London's underbelly may speak more freely." We left Ashcroft Manor at dawn, the fog still clinging to the Kent countryside like a spectral shroud. Lady Eleanor, pale but resolute, urged us to hasten, her fear of the manor's unseen threat palpable. The train journey back to London was swift, the rhythmic clatter of the wheels a stark contrast to the oppressive silence of the manor. Holmes sat opposite me, his eyes half closed, but I knew his mind was racing, piecing together the fragments of our case. "Silas Grieve is the key, Watson," he said at length. "A moneylender thrives on secrets, and Lord Ashcroft's debts may reveal the motive behind his death." London greeted us with its familiar cacophony, a symphony of clopping hooves, shouting vendors, and the distant chime of church bells. The fog had lifted slightly, but the air remained thick, the gas lamps along Baker Street glowing like beacons in the gray dawn. We returned briefly to 221B to gather Holmes's files on London's less reputable financiers, a collection of meticulously indexed notes that chronicled the city's shadowy dealings. Grieve's name appeared in several entries linked to extortionate loans and dubious connections in Whitechapel. "A man of influence in unsavory circles," Holmes remarked, tucking the file under his arm. "We shall find him in his natural habitat." Our destination was the Black Anchor, a tavern in Whitechapel known for its rough clientele and whispered transactions. The journey took us through the heart of London, from the genteel avenues of Marylebone to the narrow, grimy alleys of the East End. Hansom cabs jostled for space, their drivers cursing in the morning chill, while flower girls and newsboys hawked their wares. The contrast between the manor's Gothic isolation and the city's pulsing vitality was stark, yet both seemed to harbor secrets in equal measure. The Black Anchor was a squat, soot-stained building, its windows clouded with grime and its sign creaking in the wind. Inside, the air was thick with tobacco smoke and the sour tang of cheap ale. Patrons hunched over tables, their conversations low and guarded, their eyes flicking toward us as we entered. Holmes, in his dark overcoat and deerstalker, cut an incongruous figure among the rough-hewn laborers and petty criminals, but his presence commanded attention. I followed close behind, my hand resting near the revolver in my coat pocket, a precaution born of experience in such places. Silas Grieve was easy to spot, a wiry man with a ferret-like face, seated in a corner booth with a ledger open before him. His eyes, sharp and calculating, narrowed as Holmes approached, and his fingers twitched toward a pocket before he thought better of it. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes," he said, his voice oily yet wary. "I've heard of you. To what do I owe the pleasure?" Holmes slid into the booth opposite Grieve, his expression genial but his eyes like steel. "A matter of mutual interest, Mr. Grieve. I am investigating the death of Lord Henry Ashcroft, with whom you had dealings. I believe you can shed light on his final months." Grieve's smile was thin, revealing stained teeth. "Ashcroft? A client, yes, but long gone. Paid his debts, or so I thought. What's this about?" Holmes produced the ledger from the manor, opening it to a page marked with payments to an unnamed party. "These entries suggest otherwise. Substantial sums paid regularly until a month before his death, and this—" He slid a torn letter across the table, retrieved from the study's hidden compartment. "A contract for silence bearing the initials RT. You know more than you claim, Grieve." The moneylender's composure faltered, his eyes darting to the letter. "I don't know nothing about no contract," he said, his voice rising slightly. "Ashcroft borrowed money, sure, but he was good for it. Paid through a third party, always in cash. I never met this RT fellow. Holmes leaned forward, his voice low and cutting. Come, Grieve, you are not so careless as to forget a client's intermediary. These payments were for more than debts. They bought silence or perhaps complicity. Who delivered the money? Speak plainly, or I shall ensure Scotland Yard takes an interest in your ledgers. Grieve's fingers drummed nervously on the table, his bravado crumbling. All right, all right. The payments came through a man named Thorne, Reginald Thorne, Ashcroft's butler. He brought the cash, said it was for a private matter. I didn't ask questions. Gold speaks louder than words. Holmes's eyes gleamed. Thorne, you say? And did he ever mention a debt of his own or a secret he held over his master? Grieve shook his head, his voice dropping to a whisper. Not in so many words, but he was nervous, always looking over his shoulder. Last time I saw him, a month before Ashcroft died, he said something about settling accounts. I thought he meant the money, but maybe not. Holmes sat back, his expression unreadable. Most illuminating. One final question. This letter's crest, do you recognize it? Grieve squinted at the torn paper, his brow furrowing. Looks like the Thorne family crest, old gentry from Kent. Not Ashcroft's, that's for sure. But I swear I don't know more than that. Holmes rose, tucking the letter and ledger away. You have been most cooperative, Mr. Grieve. I suggest you remain so, should I return. He turned to me, his voice low. Come, Watson, we have what we need for now. As we left the Black Anchor, the clamor of Whitechapel enveloped us once more. The fog had thickened, cloaking the streets in a ghostly haze, and I felt the weight of our discoveries pressing down. Thorne again, I said, my voice grim. The ledger, the contract, now Grieve's testimony, it all points to him, Holmes. Could he have poisoned Lord Ashcroft to cover a blackmail scheme? Holmes's gaze was distant, his mind already racing ahead. The evidence is compelling, Watson, but too perfect. Thorne as the sole villain is a narrative someone wishes us to believe. The crest on the letter suggests another player, perhaps a relative, or someone using the Thorne name as a mask. We must return to the manor and confront our butler, but first a stop at 221B. Back at Baker Street, Holmes pored over his files, cross-referencing the Thorne family crest. His index revealed a distant connection. Rupert Thorne, a cousin of Lady Eleanor's, disgraced and disinherited years ago for gambling debts. A potential RT, Watson, Holmes said, closing the file. The plot thickens and the manor awaits our return. We must watch Thorne closely. But also this cloaked figure Mary mentioned. The trail through London has given us a thread. Now we must pull it. As we prepared to depart, the city's pulse seemed to echo the urgency of our task. The ledger, the letter, and Grieve's reluctant testimony had drawn a line from the manor's shadows to London's underbelly. But the truth remained elusive. Was Thorne the architect of Lord Ashcroft's death or a pawn in a larger game? The fog of London seemed to mirror the mystery, obscuring the path but not the determination in Holmes's eyes. Chapter 7. The Red Herring. The journey back to 221B Baker Street from the seedy confines of the Black Anchor Tavern had been a silent one, the weight of our discoveries in London settling heavily upon us. The ledger, the contract marked RT, and Silas Grieve's reluctant testimony all pointed to Reginald Thorne, the butler of Ashcroft Manor, as a central figure in the mystery of Lord Ashcroft's death. Yet Sherlock Holmes, ever wary of the obvious, seemed troubled by the very clarity of the evidence. As we settled into our familiar quarters, the fog outside thickening to a spectral veil, I sensed that our investigation was about to take a pivotal turn. Holmes stood before the fire, his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes distant as he sifted through the mental mosaic of our case. The sitting room was a chaos of papers, Lord Ashcroft's journal, the Manor's ledger, the cryptic contract, and Holmes's own notes, meticulously indexed yet now strewn across the table. I sat at my desk, my notebook open, attempting to organize my thoughts, though the tangle of clues defied easy summary. The ticking of the mantel clock and the crackle of the fire were the only sounds, save for the occasional clatter of a hansom cab filtering through the fogged windows. "Watson," Holmes said at length, breaking the silence, "the evidence against Thorne is compelling, is it not? The vial in his quarters, the ledger's payments, Greaves' testimony, the journal's mention of R.T. all form a chain that seems to bind him to Lord Ashcroft's death. And yet I cannot shake the feeling that we are being led." I looked up from my notes, puzzled. "Led, Holmes? You mean deliberately misled? But the clues are so consistent. Surely Thorne is our man. Blackmail, poison, perhaps even murder to protect his secret." Holmes turned, his eyes gleaming with that peculiar intensity that signaled a breakthrough. "Precisely, Watson. The clues are too consistent, too neatly arranged. A true criminal does not leave such a trail of breadcrumbs unless he wishes them to be followed. This case, I suspect, is a masterpiece of misdirection, a red herring designed to distract us from the true culprit." I frowned, setting down my pen. A red herring? But who would go to such lengths to frame Thorne, and why? Holmes began to pace, his movements swift and purposeful. "That, Watson, is the question we must answer. Consider the evidence anew. The vial in Thorne's room was hidden yet easily found. The note with R.T. was tucked in a compartment a child could discover. The ledger and journal point to Thorne, yet the initials could belong to another, Rupert Thorne, perhaps, the disinherited cousin we uncovered in my files. And the crest on the contract, which Greaves identified as the Thorne family, suggests a connection beyond our butler." I leaned back, my mind grappling with the implications. "You think someone planted these clues to incriminate Reginald Thorne? But to what end? If he's innocent, why the threatening letter to Lady Eleanor? And what of the cloaked figure Mary saw near the gates?" Holmes stopped pacing, picking up the torn contract from the table. He held it to the light, his fingers tracing the crest. "The letter to Lady Eleanor is the key, Watson. Leave the manor or join your husband in eternal rest. It is a threat designed to instill fear, to drive her away. But why? The manor is her inheritance, the seat of the Ashcroft legacy. To force her out suggests a motive tied to possession, land, wealth, or perhaps a secret hidden within the manor's walls." I nodded, recalling the ledger's entries. The payments to R.T. stopped a month before Lord Ashcroft's death. If they were blackmail payments, perhaps the blackmailer grew impatient or desperate. "Precisely," Holmes said, his voice sharp with conviction. "But if Thorne were the blackmailer, why continue serving as butler, risking exposure? A man cunning enough to poison his master and orchestrate a campaign of terror would not remain in plain sight. No, Watson, I believe Thorne is a scapegoat, chosen because his long service and reserved demeanor make him an easy target. The true villain is someone with a deeper stake in the Ashcroft estate." I scribbled a note, my mind racing. "Rupert Thorne, then. The cousin has motive. Disinherited, resentful, perhaps seeking to reclaim what he believes is his. The crest ties him to the contract, and his initials match." Holmes's smile was faint but approving. "A sound hypothesis, Watson, but we must test it. Rupert Thorne's whereabouts are unknown, but his shadow looms large. The cloaked figure may be our link, perhaps Rupert himself, or an agent acting on his behalf. We must return to the manor and observe Thorne closely, not as the villain, but as a potential victim of this scheme." Holmes moved to his chemical corner where he began preparing to analyze the vial and the residue from the study's glass. "These substances will confirm or refute the poison theory," he said, measuring a reagent with precision. If they match, we have evidence of murder. If not, we may be dealing with a clever ruse to make us believe in poison. As Holmes worked, I reviewed the clues in my notebook. The scuff marks on the gravel path, the disturbed ivy, the hidden passage in the study, the ledger's payments, and the contract's crest. Each seemed to point to Thorne, yet Holmes's logic cast doubt on their veracity. "What of Grieve?" I asked. He seemed nervous but cooperative. Could he be involved beyond his role as moneylender? Holmes shook his head, his eyes fixed on the bubbling solution in his beaker. Grieve is a profiteer, not a mastermind. His fear was genuine. He knows enough to be useful, but not enough to be the architect. His mention of the Thorne crest was telling, however. It suggests a connection to the family, one we must explore further. The analysis yielded results sooner than expected. Holmes held up the vial, its contents now tinged with a faint blue from his reagents. "The substance is not arsenic, Watson, nor strychnine, but a sedative. Chloral hydrate, commonly used but deadly in large doses. The residue from the glass matches, suggesting it was the vehicle for Lord Ashcroft's poisoning. Yet the vial's placement in Thorne's room remains suspect. A murderer would not keep such evidence so close." I stared at the vial, my medical mind turning. Chloral hydrate could cause heart failure, especially in a man under strain as Lord Ashcroft was. The coroner might not have tested for it, given the locked room and no obvious signs of violence. Holmes nodded, setting the vial down. A subtle choice, and one that points to someone with knowledge of pharmacology, or access to it. We must consider the household. Lady Eleanor, Mrs. Grimsby, Eliza, Thomas, and Thorne himself. Any could have procured the sedative, but only one has motive strong enough to kill. As night fell, the fog outside thickened, muffling the sounds of London. Holmes paced anew, his mind weaving the threads of our case. The red herring, Watson, is Thorne's guilt. Someone wishes us to focus on him, to see only the obvious. But the manor holds other secrets. The cloaked figure, the sealed chamber, the family crest. We must return to Ashcroft Manor at first light and set a trap for our true quarry. I felt a surge of anticipation tempered by unease. A trap, Holmes? For Rupert Thorne, or someone else? Holmes's eyes gleamed in the firelight. That, Watson, depends on who takes the bait. We shall watch Thorne, but also the shadows around him. The cloaked figure is the wild card, and I suspect their next move will reveal the hand behind this game. As I prepared for bed, the weight of the mystery pressed upon me. The evidence against Thorne was overwhelming, yet Holmes's logic suggested a deeper truth. The red herring had clouded our vision, but the trail was clearer now, leading back to the manor's Gothic halls. Who was the cloaked figure, and what secret drove them to murder? The answers lay in Kent, and I knew Holmes would not rest until they were uncovered. Chapter 8. The Midnight Intruder. The return to Ashcroft Manor from London had been a journey steeped in anticipation. The fog-shrouded countryside mirroring the uncertainty that clung to our investigation. Sherlock Holmes's revelation in 221B that the evidence against Reginald Thorne was likely a red herring had shifted our perspective, casting the butler as a potential pawn rather than the mastermind behind Lord Ashcroft's murder. The ledger, the contract with the Thorne family crest and Silas Greaves' testimony pointed to a deeper conspiracy, possibly involving Rupert Thorne, Lady Eleanor's disinherited cousin. Yet the cloaked figure seen by the scullery maid Mary remained an enigma, a shadow that might hold the key to the truth. Holmes had resolved to set a trap, and as midnight approached, the manor's oppressive silence seemed charged with impending revelation. We had arrived at the manor in the late afternoon, the storm that had plagued our earlier visit now a brooding presence, its thunder muted but ever present. Lady Eleanor greeted us with a mixture of relief and dread, her pale face betraying sleepless nights. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," she said, her voice trembling. "I heard footsteps again last night near my chambers. I fear the threat in that letter grows closer." Holmes's expression was calm but resolute. "Fear not, madam. Tonight we shall keep watch, and the shadows will yield their secrets. Pray retire as usual, but leave your door unlocked. Watson and I will ensure your safety." As darkness fell, the manor seemed to come alive with whispers of its own. The creak of settling timbers, the moan of wind through the chimneys, the faint drip of rain from the eaves. Holmes and I took up positions in a small anteroom adjacent to Lady Eleanor's chambers, a vantage point that allowed us to observe the corridor leading to her door. The room was sparsely furnished, its only light a single candle that cast long, wavering shadows on the paneled walls. Holmes sat motionless, his eyes fixed on the doorway, his senses attuned to the slightest sound. I gripped my revolver, its weight a reassuring presence, though the manor's atmosphere made my nerves taut. "Patience, Watson," Holmes murmured, his voice barely audible. "The intruder will come drawn by the lure of an unguarded lady. We must be ready to act, not merely react." The hours crept by, marked only by the distant toll of the manor's clock. At 11, the house seemed to hold its breath, the storm outside lulling into an uneasy calm. I shifted in my chair, my eyes straining to pierce the darkness beyond the candle's glow. Holmes, however, remained statue-like, his focus absolute. Then, just as the clock struck midnight, a faint sound broke the silence, a soft, deliberate creak from the corridor, followed by the muffled tread of footsteps. Holmes's hand shot up, signaling silence. He rose, silent as a specter, and motioned for me to follow. We crept to the doorway where the corridor stretched into shadow, lit only by a single sconce at its far end. A figure moved in the gloom, cloaked and masked, their form barely discernible against the dark paneling. They paused at Lady Eleanor's door, their hand reaching for the handle, a faint glint of metal betraying a knife in their grip. Holmes sprang forward with the speed of a panther, seizing the intruder's wrist before the knife could be raised. "Not so fast," he said, his voice low and commanding. The figure struggled, a stifled cry escaping their lips, but Holmes's grip was iron. I rushed to his side, my revolver trained on the intruder, my heart pounding with the thrill of the moment. "Unmask yourself," Holmes ordered, twisting the figure's arm until the knife clattered to the floor. With a swift motion, he pulled the cloth mask away, revealing a face that stunned us both. Eliza, the young maid, her eyes wide with fear and defiance. "Eliza!" I exclaimed, lowering my weapon. "What in heaven's name are you doing?" The maid trembled, her breath coming in short gasps. "I meant no harm, sirs, I swear it. I was only searching, trying to protect her ladyship." Holmes's eyes narrowed, his grip unrelenting. Protect her? With a knife skulking in the dead of night? Speak plainly, Eliza, or you shall find yourself explaining to Scotland Yard. Eliza's shoulders sagged, tears welling in her eyes. "I heard things, Mr. Holmes, whispers, plans. Someone wants her ladyship gone out of the manor. I thought if I could find proof I could stop them. I was looking for papers, something to show who's behind it." Holmes released her, stepping back but keeping the knife in hand. "Proof, you say? And what have you found, creeping about like a thief?" Eliza hesitated, her voice barely audible. "Letters, sir, hidden in the west wing. I saw Mr. Thorne with them, reading by candlelight. They had the same crest as the one you showed her ladyship, a lion and a cross. I thought they might be important, so I came tonight to find them." I exchanged a glance with Holmes, the mention of the Thorne family crest sending a chill through me. "Letters with the crest," I said. "Could they be the same as the contract we found?" Holmes's expression was unreadable, but his eyes burned with intensity. Possibly, Watson, but her story is thin. A maid does not turn sleuth with a knife unless driven by more than loyalty. He turned to Eliza, his voice sharp. Who sent you, Eliza? Speak the truth, or I shall deduce it myself. Eliza shook her head, tears streaming down her face. No one, sir. I swear I only wanted to help. I've seen things. Mr. Thorne meeting someone at the gates late at night. A cloaked man, like Mary said. I thought if I could find those letters, I'd know who he was. Holmes studied her for a long moment, his gaze piercing. Very well, he said at last. You will show us where you saw these letters. But mark my words, Eliza. If you are playing a double game, I will know it. We escorted Eliza to the west wing, her steps hesitant but guided by Holmes's unyielding presence. The corridor was silent, the storm's brief lull giving way to renewed gusts that rattled the windows. Eliza led us to a small alcove near the sealed chamber where a loose panel in the wainscoting concealed a narrow space. Holmes knelt, his fingers probing the crevice, and withdrew a single letter. Its seal broken but bearing the unmistakable lion and cross of the thorn crest. He unfolded it carefully, his eyes scanning the contents. A correspondence, he said, between Lord Ashcroft and an unnamed party promising payment for discretion in a matter of inheritance. The initials again, R.T., but the handwriting differs from the note in Thorne's room. This is no forgery, Watson, but a genuine relic of a deeper scheme. I peered at the letter, my mind racing. Rupert Thorne, perhaps, the cousin plotting to reclaim the estate. Holmes folded the letter, tucking it into his pocket. A plausible theory, but we must not leap to conclusions. Eliza's presence here, armed and secretive, suggests either complicity or desperation. We shall keep her under watch. But the cloaked figure remains our true quarry. We returned Eliza to the servants' quarters, instructing Mrs. Grimsby to keep her confined until morning. As we made our way back to Lady Eleanor's chambers, the manor seemed to pulse with unseen threats, its shadows hiding eyes that watched our every move. Holmes, I said, my voice low. Eliza's story. Do you believe her? Holmes's smile was enigmatic. I believe she is frightened, Watson, but whether by guilt or fear of another I cannot yet say. The letter confirms a plot tied to the Thorne family, but the cloaked figure is the key. Tomorrow we shall set a new trap, one that will draw our adversary into the open. As we settled into our vigil once more, the midnight intruder's unmasking lingered in my mind. Eliza's actions had deepened the mystery, casting doubt on her loyalty and raising questions about the cloaked figure's identity. Was she a pawn, like Thorne, or a player in her own right? The manor's secrets were unraveling, but the truth remained just beyond our grasp, hidden in the shadows of Ashcroft's ancient walls. Chapter 9. Pieces of the puzzle. The unmasking of Eliza as the midnight intruder had cast a new layer of complexity over the mystery of Ashcroft Manor. Her tearful claims of seeking to protect Lady Eleanor ringing with a mix of sincerity and suspicion. The letter she led us to, bearing the Thorne family crest, had confirmed a plot tied to inheritance and secrecy. Yet Sherlock Holmes remained wary, sensing the hand of a master manipulator behind the clues. As dawn broke over the manor, the storm that had raged for days finally subsided, leaving a brittle calm that seemed to mirror the tension within. Holmes declared that our next step was to consolidate our findings, and so we retreated to the manor's library, a cavernous room that felt like the heart of its secrets. The library was a sanctuary of oak and leather, its shelves groaning under the weight of centuries-old books, their spines cracked and faded. A massive fireplace cast a warm glow, though its heat did little to dispel the chill that clung to the manor's stones. Holmes had commandeered a long table spreading out our evidence, the ledger from the sealed chamber, the contract and letter with the thorn crest, Lord Ashcroft's journal, the vial of chloral hydrate, and the residue-stained glass from the study. He had also constructed a makeshift board, pinning notes, sketches of the manor's layout, and fragments of correspondence, connecting them with red string to form a web of suspicion. "Watson," Holmes said, his voice vibrant with focus as he paced before the board. "We are nearing the heart of this labyrinth, but the path is treacherous. The clues, Thorne's vial, the ledger, Eliza's intrusion, form a pattern, yet it is incomplete. We must align the pieces before the final act." I set down my pen, my notebook filled with details of our investigation. "The evidence still points to Reginald Thorne," I said, gesturing to the board. "The initials RT appear in the ledger, the contract, and the journal. Grieve confirmed Thorne's role as intermediary. But you suspect a red herring, and now Eliza's actions muddy the waters. Could she be working with someone, perhaps the cloaked figure?" Holmes paused, his eyes gleaming as he pinned a new item to the board. A monogrammed handkerchief discovered in the hidden passage of the locked study during a second search that morning. Its fine linen bore the initials RT in elegant embroidery, but the fabric was too luxurious for a butler's possession. "This, Watson," he said, "is the pivot. The handkerchief is not Reginald Thorne's. It belongs to another, someone of means and connection to the Thorne family. I believe it is Rupert Thorne's, the disinherited cousin." I leaned forward, my pulse quickening. Rupert Thorne again. The crest on the letter, the initials, and now this handkerchief. It all fits. But what's his motive? To reclaim the estate? Holmes nodded, his fingers tracing the strings on the board. "Precisely. The ledger shows payments to RT that ceased before Lord Ashcroft's death, suggesting a falling out. The contract speaks of discretion in a matter of inheritance. Rupert Thorne, cast out for his debts, may have sought to force his way back into the family's wealth. Lord Ashcroft's death by chloral hydrate was no accident. It was murder designed to clear the path for Rupert's claim." I frowned, piecing together the clues. But why frame Reginald Thorne? And what of the cloaked figure? Could Rupert be the one Mary and Eliza saw near the gates? Holmes resumed pacing, his voice low and intense. "The cloaked figure is indeed the key. Reginald Thorne, I suspect, is a pawn, blackmailed or coerced into compliance. The vial in his room, the note with his initials, these were planted to divert suspicion. Eliza's intrusion suggests she knows more than she claims, perhaps acting as an unwitting ally or a spy for Rupert. The threatening letter to Lady Eleanor was meant to drive her from the manor, leaving it vulnerable to a claim." I scribbled notes, my mind racing to keep up. "So Rupert poisoned Lord Ashcroft, using the hidden passage to enter the study undetected. He planted evidence against Reginald to mislead us, and now he's using fear to force Lady Eleanor out. But why the handkerchief? Surely he wouldn't leave such a damning clue." Holmes's smile was enigmatic. "An oversight, Watson, or perhaps arrogance. The handkerchief was likely dropped during his movements through the passage, a careless moment that betrays his presence. The crest and initials confirm his identity, but we must verify his whereabouts. I have sent a telegram to Scotland Yard, requesting any records of Rupert Thorne's recent activities. The reply should arrive by morning." As Holmes spoke, I studied the board, its web of connections painting a chilling picture. The scuff marks on the gravel path, the disturbed ivy, the chemical residue in the study all pointed to a calculated plan. Yet Eliza's role remained unclear. "What of the maid?" I asked. "Her story about protecting Lady Eleanor feels thin. Could she be in league with Rupert?" Holmes paused, his eyes narrowing. "Eliza is a puzzle within the puzzle. Her fear seemed genuine, but her actions, sneaking into Lady Eleanor's chambers with a knife, suggest either desperation or duplicity. She may be a pawn, like Reginald, coerced by threats or promises." We must question her further, but discreetly, lest we alert our true adversary. We turned our attention to the library shelves, searching for any records that might shed light on the Thorne family. Among the dusty tomes, Holmes uncovered a genealogical volume detailing the Ashcroft lineage, which included a brief mention of Rupert Thorne. Disinherited a decade ago after a scandal involving gambling debts, he had vanished from society, rumored to have fled to the continent. "A man with a grudge," Holmes said, closing the book, "and a motive to reclaim what he lost." As night deepened, the manor's silence grew oppressive, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the occasional creak of its timbers. Holmes stood before the board, his fingers tracing the strings that linked each clue. "The pieces are falling into place, Watson," he said. Rupert Thorne orchestrated Lord Ashcroft's murder, using chloral hydrate delivered through the hidden passage. He planted evidence to implicate Reginald, whose own debt long owed, perhaps a past indiscretion, made him vulnerable to blackmail. The cloaked figure, likely Rupert himself, has been watching the manor, ensuring his plan unfolds. I nodded, the logic of Holmes's deductions becoming clear. And the threatening letter was his final move, to scare Lady Eleanor away and seize the estate. But how do we catch him? He's been elusive, a shadow in the fog. Holmes's eyes gleamed with determination. "We set a trap, Watson, but not for Rupert alone. We must draw out the cloaked figure and confirm Eliza's role. Tomorrow night we shall stage a scene. Lady Eleanor will announce her intention to leave the manor, citing fear. If Rupert is watching, he will act, and we shall be ready." As we finalized our plan, a faint sound reached my ears, a soft thud from the corridor outside. Holmes was at the door in an instant, his hand on the knob. "Quiet, Watson," he whispered, opening the door to reveal an empty hallway, save for a single candle flickering on a side table. At its base lay a small folded note, its edges worn as though handled often. Holmes unfolded it, his expression darkening. The note bore a single line in a familiar angular hand. "The truth lies closer than you think." No signature, no initials, but the paper matched the threatening letter sent to Lady Eleanor. "A taunt," Holmes said, his voice cold. "Our adversary grows bold, Watson. This note was left to unsettle us, but it confirms their presence in the manor. We are close, dangerously close." As we returned to the library, the weight of the mystery pressed upon me. The handkerchief, the letter, the cloaked figure all pointed to Rupert Thorne, yet the note's cryptic message suggested a final twist. The puzzle was nearly complete, but one piece remained elusive, hidden in the shadows of Ashcroft Manor. Chapter 10. The Final Deduction. The night had been one of vigilance and anticipation, the shadows of Ashcroft Manor seeming to pulse with the weight of secrets on the verge of revelation. Sherlock Holmes's plan to lure the true culprit into the open had been set. Lady Eleanor, under our guidance, had announced her intention to flee the manor, citing fear of the mysterious threat that loomed over her. The cryptic note found in the library, "The truth lies closer than you think," had only sharpened Holmes's resolve, confirming that our adversary was near, watching, and perhaps ready to act. As midnight approached, we gathered in the grand hall, the stage for what Holmes declared would be the final act in this sinister drama. The hall was a cavernous expanse, its towering portraits and gilded sconces bathed in the flickering glow of candles. Lady Eleanor sat near the fireplace, her face pale but composed, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Reginald Thorne stood stiffly by the door, his gaunt features unreadable, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. Eliza, the maid, hovered near Mrs. Grimsby, her nervous glances darting between Holmes and the shadowed corners of the room. The housekeeper, her hands twisting a handkerchief, seemed to shrink under the weight of the moment. Holmes had orchestrated this gathering with precision, ensuring all key players were present. but the true target of our trap had yet to reveal themselves. Holmes stood before the fire, his silhouette commanding, his voice calm but resonant with authority. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his eyes sweeping the room, "we stand at the culmination of a most intricate puzzle, one woven with threads of deceit, greed, and murder. The death of Lord Henry Ashcroft was no accident, but a calculated act, designed to secure an inheritance and cloaked in a web of misdirection. Tonight we shall unravel that web and expose the truth." Lady Eleanor's breath caught, her eyes wide. "Mr. Holmes, you mean to say my husband was murdered? But the coroner—" "The coroner was deceived, madam," Holmes interjected, his tone firm. "The evidence is clear. A locked study, a hidden passage, a glass tainted with chloral hydrate, a sedative that in sufficient dose mimics heart failure. Lord Ashcroft was poisoned, and the architect of his death stands among us." A murmur rippled through the group, Thorne's jaw tightening, Eliza's hands trembling. Holmes raised a hand, silencing them. "Let us begin with the clues," he said, producing the ledger from the sealed chamber. "Payments to an individual marked RT, ceasing a month before the murder. A contract promising silence on a matter of inheritance, bearing the Thorne family crest. A vial of chloral hydrate conveniently found in Mr. Thorne's quarters alongside a note with his initials. All pointed to our butler as the culprit, a neat, compelling narrative." Thorne stepped forward, his voice sharp. "I've done nothing, Mr. Holmes. I served his lordship faithfully, as I've told you." Holmes's smile was faint but cutting. "Indeed, Mr. Thorne, and therein lies the flaw in the narrative. The evidence against you is too perfect, too easily discovered. A true murderer does not leave such a trail unless it is meant to mislead." He turned to the group, his eyes locking on each face. "The true villain sought to frame you, Reginald, exploiting your long service and reserved demeanor. But another clue betrayed them. A monogrammed handkerchief found in the hidden passage of the study bearing the initials RT and too fine for a butler's possession." Holmes held up the handkerchief, its embroidered initials catching the firelight. "This belongs not to Reginald Thorne, but to Rupert Thorne, Lady Eleanor's estranged cousin, disinherited for his debts and consumed by envy for the Ashcroft estate." A gasp echoed through the hall, and at that moment the heavy doors swung open with a creak. A tall figure stepped into the light, cloaked no longer, his face sharp and angular with eyes that burned with defiance. "Enough, Holmes," he snapped, his voice resonant with suppressed rage. "You've meddled enough in matters that don't concern you." Lady Eleanor rose, her hand flying to her mouth. "Rupert, you've been behind this?" Holmes's gaze was unyielding. "Rupert Thorne, the architect of this tragedy. Allow me to deduce the chain of events. You, sir, learned of a family secret, a matter of inheritance that threatened your claim to the Ashcroft estate. You blackmailed Lord Ashcroft, demanding payments for your silence, as evidenced by the ledger. When he refused to continue, you used the hidden passage in the study to administer chloral hydrate, ensuring his death appeared natural. You planted the vial and note in Reginald's quarters, knowing his past indiscretions, a debt long owed, made him vulnerable to suspicion." Rupert's lips curled into a sneer. "A fine tale, Holmes, but you've no proof. Initials and a handkerchief, mere conjecture." Holmes's voice grew colder. "Not conjecture, but fact. The letter in the West Wing found by Eliza bore your crest and handwriting. The scuff marks on the gravel path match your boots, which I observed in London through inquiries at your lodgings. The cloaked figure seen by Mary was you, watching the manor to ensure your plan succeeded. And the threatening note to Lady Eleanor, 'Leave the manor or join your husband,' was your final gambit to drive her out, securing the estate for yourself." Eliza stepped forward, her voice trembling but resolute. "It's true, sirs. I found the letters and I saw him at the gates. I was scared, but I wanted to protect her ladyship. Holmes nodded, his eyes never leaving Rupert. Eliza's fear was genuine, though her methods were misguided. She was not your ally, Rupert, but a witness to your movements. Your mistake was underestimating the Manor's loyalty to Lady Eleanor. Rupert's defiance faltered, his hands clenching. You think you've won, Holmes? The estate should have been mine. Henry squandered it, and Eleanor has no right to it. Lady Eleanor's voice was steady, though tears glistened in her eyes. You killed my husband, Rupert, for greed, for envy. How could you? Holmes raised a hand, his tone commanding. Your confession, Rupert, is unnecessary but welcome. Scotland Yard has been informed, and officers await outside thanks to my telegram. Your scheme is undone. Rupert lunged toward the door, but Holmes was faster, seizing his arm with a grip of iron. I drew my revolver, ensuring no escape. Moments later, 2 constables entered, their lanterns casting stark light across the hall. Rupert's bravado collapsed, his shoulders sagging as he was led away, his muttered curses fading into the night. Lady Eleanor sank into her chair, weeping softly. Thank you, Mr. Holmes, she said. The shadow is lifted, but the cost is heavy. Holmes's expression softened, a rare moment of empathy. The truth, madam, is often a bitter medicine, but it heals. Your husband's memory is honored by your courage. As the constables departed with Rupert, the manor seemed to exhale, its oppressive air lightening. Reginald Thorne, cleared of suspicion, bowed his head in gratitude while Eliza and Mrs. Grimsby exchanged relieved glances. We returned to Baker Street the next morning, the fog lifting to reveal a crisp dawn. Holmes sat by the fire, his violin in hand, drawing a soft, reflective tune. Watson, he said, his voice thoughtful. This case reminds us that the heart of man is a labyrinth, more complex than any locked room. Envy drove Rupert Thorne to murder, but reason and observation unveiled his deceit. There is a lesson here. Truth pursued diligently will always prevail over greed. I nodded, my journal open before me, capturing the final chapter of our adventure. The manor's secrets had been laid bare, its shadows dispelled by Holmes's relentless logic. Yet the moral lingered, a reminder that trust is fragile, and only truth can mend its fractures.